Coming up on New Day at Arirang, with the country expecting to see the peak of the Omicron outbreak, the government has eased social distancing measures, as up to 8 people will be permitted at gatherings instead of just 6, while for people entering Korea, they'll no longer have to self-isolate on arrival if they've been vaccinated. The UN says 10 million people, or about a quarter of Ukraine's population, have been displaced by the conflict, with at least 902 civilians said to have been killed. President-elect Woo Sang-hyeok has decided on a location for the new presidential office. Yoon says the new office will be set up on the site currently occupied by the Defense Ministry.
Hello and welcome to this Monday edition of New Day at Arirang. Thank you again so much for tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And of course, filling in for Mark Broom this week, I'm Lee Seung-jae. Now it's 8 a.m. in Seoul, Korea on March 21st. Over the next hour or so, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. And as always, we're going to start things off with the COVID-19 situation here in Korea. Though we're seeing a drop in the number of infections after what health experts have called a peak last week, authorities remain on high alert while at the same time slightly easing social distancing guidelines.
For more, we turn to Shin Yoon, who's joining us live in the studio with us. Good morning, Yoon.
Good morning.
So like always, let's start with today's updates.
Well, Mo-gyan, we're expecting to see the daily tally hover in the 200,000s because up to 9 p.m. on Sunday, we've already reported 204,054 new infections, and this was down by 114,784 infections from the same time the day before, and is quite similar to what had been reported during the same time frame last week. We're just seeing the spread of COVID-19 slow down after hitting an all-time high last Wednesday when caseloads went above 540,000. Likewise, health authorities have said we've been facing the peak of the Omicron wave and have forecast that new infections will decline significantly from next week.
So, yeah, and obviously, due to the peak of the Omicron, a number of people have expressed their discomfort, whether it be our colleagues and so forth, but also particularly the pharmacies as well. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Because the government has made at-home recovery the norm, most of the population had to secure their own medication. In other words, those infected would call up local hospitals or clinics, which would then prescribe medication for those looking after them to pick up. But the problem was that there weren't enough drugs to give out, not even cough medicine, because there were way too many people looking for it. Whether it's those infected with COVID-19 or those reporting similar symptoms, which include coughing, phlegm, and a fever. Take a listen to the difficulties pharmacists here are facing on a daily basis.
Whether it's a direct transaction or a wholesale drug, there's not enough medication left in stock. While there are more prescriptions, we're running out of both specialized and general drugs.
We can't place additional orders now because they won't come. So I have to dispense medicine with similar compounds. But I'm panicking because I can't do that forever. Of the 40 years since I opened this pharmacy, I've never faced this kind of situation before.
All right, but despite so, Yoon, we hear that authorities have decided to slightly ease social distancing measures beginning today. So can you tell us more on that?
That's right. So firstly, South Korean health authorities have eased the country's social distancing guidelines to allow larger gatherings of up to 8 people. And this is 2 more than what had been a maximum of 6 people up to Sunday. Business hours for restaurants and cafes will remain the same, though, having to close at 11 p.m. Health authorities have decided to modify their antivirus measures now, despite concerns from some health experts that the scale of the pandemic could expand amid the surge of Omicron. Officials said, though, that they would only make slight tweaks to the extent that it doesn't make the situation worse or increase strain on the medical system. And this explains why they have decided not to extend business operation hours from 11 p.m. to midnight. And more measures have been eased specifically for those who have been fully vaccinated. From Monday, travelers who have been fully vaccinated in Korea Korea or abroad will be able to enter the country without a 7-day quarantine period. Those who have been vaccinated overseas must submit a proof of vaccination to a public health center. Also, while this latest measure will apply to travelers from most countries, it won't be applied to those coming in from Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, or Myanmar who still have to quarantine. Another new COVID-19 measure to kick off today is giving boosters to teens aged 12 to 17 who had their second vaccine shot more than 3 months ago.
Yeah, hopefully these easing of the restrictions doesn't lead to another uptick and we finally do see that downtick in cases, right? Yeon, as always, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you so much.
And moving on to other stories, we're now heading into the 4th week since Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
While international efforts are underway to stop Moscow from further aggression, its attacks continue. Our Song Yoo-jin with the latest.
Russia's attack on Ukraine has been going on for almost a month, but the onslaught shows no signs of letting up. A Ukrainian human rights ombudswoman took to Telegram on Sunday local time, saying that Russian tanks bombed a care home located in the eastern Luhansk region on March 11th, which resulted in the immediate death of 56 seniors. She added that some 15 survivors were forcibly taken to a nearby city under Russian control. Russia also confirmed on Sunday that it had conducted more attacks on its neighbor under what it calls part of a special military operation.
During the day, Russia's tactical aviation hit 89 military facilities of Ukraine, including 4 control centers, 2 multiple missile launcher systems, 9 artillery systems, 5 weapons and munitions depots, and also 65 places of deployment of military vehicles.
The daily bombardments have resulted in a skyrocketing number of refugees and deaths. The United Nations Refugee Agency announced on Sunday local time that roughly a quarter of the total Ukrainian population, 10 million people, have been displaced from across the country. With women and children accounting for 90% of the refugees, the risk of human trafficking is looming, especially over child refugees. The UN Human Rights Office also reported at least 902 civilians had been killed, but the actual number is expected to be considerably higher due to delays in transferring information. Meanwhile, international society is keeping a close eye on China regarding its possible assistance to Russia. Evaluating President Biden's video call with Chinese President Xi Jinping as frank, detailed, and substantive, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield told CNN on Sunday that Washington made its position clear that there will be consequences if China decides to provide military or financial support to Russia. She also called on Beijing to not defend what is indefensible, referring to Russia's aggression. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke with CNN on Sunday as well, saying he is ready for negotiations with Russia, warning that failure in talks could lead to a third world war. He added it's time to meet, talk, restore territorial integrity and justice for Ukraine. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
The crisis in Ukraine turned millions of Ukrainians into refugees. Though many of them have been offered a safe haven in neighboring countries, they continue to endure bitterly cold weather. Our Kim Hyo-sun has their story.
This is a refugee camp set up in Poland for Ukrainians fleeing the Russian invasion.
This is a shelter for moms and children. The place isn't so warm.
A cold front hit Eastern Europe with the overnight temperature in Poland dropping to -2 to 3 Celsius. Ukrainian refugees in Moldova gather around space heaters to keep themselves warm.
It's very difficult because of the cold weather. I'm especially worried about my child.
The volunteers bring them scarves and blankets to keep them warm in the bitterly cold temperature. Hospitals near refugee camps in Poland are full of people suffering from cold-related illnesses.
Many kids are suffering from dehydration, exhaustion, frostbite, and chill.
Making matters worse, the price of oil, electricity, and gas is skyrocketing due to the war and sanctions on Russia.
Gas prices have jumped by nearly 70 to 80% compared to before the war. We're expecting the prices to increase even further in the latter half of 2022.
Millions of refugees fled to temporary shelters provided by neighboring countries, but they continue to endure cold weather and hunger, longing for their homes. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Yemen's Houthi rebels have reportedly attacked a facility run by Saudi Arabia's oil giant Aramco. Saudi state-run media reported that the rebels unleashed a barrage of drone and missile attacks on Saudi Arabia, targeting a liquefied natural gas plant, water desalination plant, oil facility, and power station. They added that Sunday's attack did not cause casualties, but damaged civilian homes and vehicles. This was the latest escalation of Houthi cross-border attacks on Saudi Arabia as peace talks between the two sides remain stalled.
And now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Of course, South Korea's COVID-19 cases dropped below 400,000 for the second straight day on Sunday, with some hoping that the worst has finally come to an end.
However, concerns still linger over the rising number of people who've succumbed to the virus and the number of critically ill patients remaining above 1,000. For more on where South Korea stands in terms of COVID-19, we connect to Dr. Alice Tan, internist at Ms. Mary Women's Hospital via Skype. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Tan.
Thank you for having me.
So we're expecting new infections over the 200,000 today, which is certainly a huge decline compared to last week. But health authorities did predict the peak to come this week. So cautiously speaking, can we expect cases to peak later this week?
I think we are very close to the peak. We may have passed it. There are some indicators that suggests that perhaps the worst is over in terms of daily new cases. First of all, the total case count from yesterday, Sunday, was less than 1 week ago, so the Sunday previous. Also, the time that it's taken to add an additional 1 million cases has staggered at 2 days. It may now be going to 3 days, which is a sign of deceleration. However, I'm very concerned because our test positivity numbers remain exceedingly high. They're still above 60%. And so whenever you see this high number of test positivity, that lets you know that there are still people who have the virus, who are infectious. They're still in the community, but they just have not been detected yet. Also, my concern is, we started the Omicron wave with 22 million people who were either unvaccinated or under-vaccinated, meaning they only received 1 dose of a COVID vaccine. That pool of people who are vulnerable to infection has gone down considerably because more people have gotten their booster shot, but also because 9 million people have gotten infected with Omicron since it became the dominant strain. And so that leaves about 10 million people who are still vulnerable, which is much less than when we started, but still it's enough to give us a prolonged tail going down from the peak of this Omicron wave.
So, Dr. Dan, I mean, it seems like the cases right now, the daily cases are on a decline right now. And of course, crossing my fingers here that it does continue to go on a decline. But what's concerning is that we're still seeing a large number of people kind of succumbing to the virus. We're seeing about over 300 cases, casualties in the past 2 days. If South Korea has such a high vaccination rate, why are we seeing so much casualties on a daily basis?
Right. Well, the first thing to remember is, people were saying that Omicron is a mild disease. It is not a universally mild disease. For people who are old and frail, this can be a devastating, severe, and fatal disease. When we look at the death count since March 1st, there have been 4,370 deaths, which is more than double the highest reported death count for our country, which happened in December 2021. And the reason why we're seeing more deaths is because when we look at the pool of people who died from the second week of February to the second week of March, so that's a 5-week period, 3,286 people died. Of them, 94% were aged 60 or greater. So definitely being in that older age demographic risk factor for having severe disease. And in the recent past, the virus has infiltrated no less than 16 long-term care facilities. And at each facility, it's caused anywhere from 100 to nearly 300 cases. And so with the virus going into these facilities where the most vulnerable people are, that certainly has caused a spike in our fatalities. Also, I think there's some people, weak immune systems, elderly people, and no matter how many doses of the vaccine they receive, they still have a very difficult time mounting a defense against COVID-19. And we can see that because of the people who died during that 5-week period, 52% had received 2 or 3 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine. And so this is certainly a very difficult virus that we're dealing with. But the fact that it's gone into the communities where the elderly and the most vulnerable people are is what's causing our fatality rates to be so high.
Now, let's turn to the latest social distancing measures. Starting today, eased restriction measures are taking into effect, and some say, it's not a huge difference, but others argue that we should not be easing such restrictions given the current, hike in infections. So as a doctor, what's your take on the latest measures?
Well, I think it's just very paradoxical. At a time when we're seeing the highest number of fatalities, the highest number of people admitted to a hospital, of course now people are feeling it, right, in the workplace. Everyone has a colleague who's out sick. But this is also true in hospitals. At a time when there is the highest number of COVID-19 patients admitted to the hospital, we are also having doctors and nurses call in sick and not be able to help with taking care of these patients. And this is leading to tremendous strain in our healthcare system. And so I think it's paradoxical. It really doesn't make sense to be lowering stringency levels when we are at the highest level of risk. In my opinion, as a doctor, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the consensus amongst all the doctors right now saying maybe we should have eased restrictions when we did finally see that peak and we go on a downhill trend. But there's also the big concerns, a big question of whether or not the rapid antigen tests are even effective, because a lot of people are testing it through the rapid antigen, finding out that they're negative, sometimes even more than once, later to find out they're testing positive on PCR. Could this be another reason why we're seeing so many infection cases where people are kind of going out and about thinking they've tested negative, they're okay, just based on the rapid antigen test?
Absolutely. So from South Africa, the message was very clear early on. Doctors on the ground were saying that they were testing their patients with rapid antigen tests when the patients were infected with Omicron. And the first 2 tests were negative a lot of the time. And so this is certainly a reason, I think, that people, they test at home, they find that the test result is negative, they think that they're okay. And then they go out in the community and, very likely they're spreading the virus to other people. So I think very early on when we had the algorithm for testing, the algorithm stated that if your rapid antigen test was negative, there was no next step to take. But I think what we should have said is, even if your test is negative, if you have a high risk factor for being positive for COVID. In other words, you've had close contact, a family member is positive, or you have symptoms, don't take that negative test result as being the end and final say of what your infectious state is. You should get at least another test 24 hours later. One negative test when the test probability is so high really doesn't mean much. And I think that is, you're pointing out a very good factor in why we may be seeing prolonged transmission.
So we have to double check if we are really negative, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. One negative home test when you have risk factors or symptoms should not be taken as a true negative.
All right, Dr. Tan, thank you always so much for your tips. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Now, since this election, President-elect Woo Sang-hyeok has declared that he will not be moving into the Blue House, the traditional home of South Korean leaders, and will instead set up a new presidential office that he says will be closer to the people. Now he's decided on a location and has announced that the new office will be set up on the site currently occupied by the Defense Ministry. And the Blue House will become a public venue open to visitors. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
Putting an end to weeks of speculation, South Korean President Woo Sang-hyeok announced himself on Sunday that the new presidential office will be set up on the property currently used by the Defense Ministry in Seoul's Yongsan-gu district.
어려운 일이지만 국가의 미래를 위해 내린 결단입니다. 단순한 공간의 이동이 아니라 국민을 제대로 섬기고 제대로 일하기 위한 각오와 국민과의 약속을 실천하고자 하는 저의 의지를 국민 여러분께서 헤아려 주실 것을 부탁드립니다.
This is a map of the current Defense Ministry's properties. The 10-story building in the middle is where he's expected to set up his offices. And the area up to this line will be open to the public so that people can get as close as possible. He says the decision had to be made quickly as he had no intention of moving into the current presidential office at Cheongwade, known globally as the Blue House. He emphasized the need for better communication with his aides, the press, and the people, saying that the Blue House doesn't offer that.
청와대는 절대 들어가지 않고 이 어떤 제왕적 권력의 상징은 이게 조선 총독부터 100년 이상을 써온 데입니다. 그래서 저는 이 장소는 국민께 다 돌려드리고 국립공원화하는 것이 맞다는 그 생각에는 변함이 없고.
He hit back at criticisms that relocating the presidential office and residence will incur unnecessary costs. According to the finance ministry, Yoon says it'll cost a little under $41 million. This includes renovating the buildings, transferring systems for his aides, as well as making sure the building is secure enough for a president. The president-elect will use the current Army Chief of Staff's official residence and promised that his motorcade to and from work won't cause traffic problems because the trip will take less than 5 minutes. He also pointed out that the large amount of land nearby that used to house the U.S. military is expected to be open to the public soon, so when it's all complete, he'll be able to connect with the people even better. With decades of presidential history at the Blue House coming to a close, Yoon also promised to open the site on May 10th as soon as he is inaugurated. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea's National Security Council held an emergency meeting Sunday morning soon after North Korea fired 4 rounds from a multiple rocket launcher on the west coast. The rockets were fired over a period of an hour starting at 7:20 a.m. Sunday from an unidentified location in Pyeongnam-do province into the West Sea. The NSC conducted a detailed analysis of the rockets and said they're keeping a close eye on the North and its recent missile launches. They also said the South Korean military will maintain a strong readiness posture based on the alliance with the United States to make sure there is no lapse in security during the upcoming change of administrations.
And now it's time for Global Insight and an in-depth look at some of the main developments in world affairs. Now, last week, a missile fired by North Korea blew up almost immediately after blasting off in an apparent failed weapons launch. Analysis later concluded that it was an attempted test of the Hwasong-17, a new ICBM that was displayed during a past military parade in Pyongyang. This has sharply raised the likelihood of a possible successful ICBM test by the regime, which North Korea has not conducted since 2017. The failed launch would have been the regime's 10th weapons test this year, following 7 missile tests and 2 of what North Korea has said were reconnaissance satellites. And in addition to this, Pyongyang also fired 4 suspected shots of multiple rocket launchers into the Yellow Sea on Sunday morning, continuing acts that could heighten tensions on the Korean peninsula. So what is the motive behind North Korea's recent tests, and why do they come at this specific time? For more in-depth analysis, we are joined by Mark Barry, Associate Editor of Emeritus at the International Journal on World Peace, and Kim Jae-chun, Dean of Seogang University's Graduate School of International Studies via Skype. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start with Mark. Let's start by taking a look at the timing of this attempted ICBM test and the shots from the rocket launchers. The ICBM test came a day after South Korea's presidential election, and just a few days later came the rocket launcher firings. Can you tell us what factors drove the North to attempt this test at the current time?
It's 90% domestic driven. It's something that they had been planning, as I understand it, from January of last year. And it's an internal decision in terms of what is good from the point of view of ultimately projecting internally and externally the sovereignty and independence of the DPRK. Moreover, even if 10 or more % is driven by external factors, oftentimes, I think North Korean perception of the external environment is very, very skewed, and it's ideologically driven. So I would say it's primarily domestic, and it's much less of a message to the U.S. or surrounding countries than others may think.
Mm-hmm. Now let's join Professor Kim into the conversation. There's also a big anniversary coming up for North Korea, what would be its founder Kim Il-sung's 110th birthday on April 15th. That's just less than a month away. So do you expect more military activity and provocations out of the North between now and then?
I do. I do expect a lot of military activities and provocations before the birthday of Kim Il-sung, which is April the 15th. The official title of Kim Il-sung's birthday is Taehanjeol, the Day of Sun, and it's the most important national holiday in North Korea. Traditionally, North Korea has held a very high-profile military parades before Kim Il-sung's birthday and demonstrated their new weapons, such as new types of ICBMs and cruise missiles and other strategic weapons. And this is to show their military prowess to the world and also to rally North Korean public around the leadership. You know, hey, people, we are a very powerful country, and you should be very proud of that. And you can count on our leadership. So it's quite likely for North Korea to hold big events, military events, and test new weapons and demonstrate their new weapons capabilities. One interesting thing that you'll have to note, though, is that North Korea basically didn't do anything this year before Kim Jong-il's birthday, which was February. By the way, Kim Jong-un is son to Kim Il-sung and father to Kim Jong-un. Names can be quite confusing here. Anyways, Kim Jong-un might have exercised restraint because Kim Jong-un's birthday fell during the Beijing Olympic. But now the Olympic is over, and I think North Korea is prepared to show their military prowess to the world.
Yes, those names are sometimes quite confusing. But now turning over to the situation in Ukraine, Professor Kim, how much of an impact do you think Russia's invasion of Ukraine has on North Korea and its ties with Russia?
You mean ties between Kim Jong-un regime and Moscow?
Yes.
You know, one of the most important changes in international relations in recent years is growing unity between China and Russia. And I think Kim Jong-un made a strategic decision to band together with the Xi Jinping regime in China and Putin in Russia. It is alleged that Xi Jinping gave a go sign to Putin's plan to invade Ukraine when both leaders met in Beijing for the Olympic. And North Korea certainly wants to take a part in this coalition of autocracies, you know, coalition of China and Russia and other autocratic countries. That, I think, is the reason, at least one of the reasons, why North Korea intensified the military provocations after Russia invaded Ukraine. And testing of these new weapons, these new missiles, was to sort of challenge the United States and to side with the Russians and Chinese. You know, hey, Americans, you have a war in Ukraine that you have to deal with. Can you handle our provocations in Northeast Asia? Is the kind of message that North Korea is imparting to Americans. So yes, I think Russian invasion of Ukraine strengthened ties between Russia and North Korea, and ties between China, Russia, and North Korea.
Well, that seems to be not quite of a happy news for the U.S. But now, staying with the invasion of Ukraine, as far as I know, China hasn't condemned Russia for the invasion. But to prevent China's backing of Russia, the U.S. has been warning China not to provide financial assistance or military aid to Moscow. So, Mark, do you know North Korea has been a close ally of China, but how does North Korea take this, and what impact does the invasion have on the North's ties with Beijing?
You know, these three countries, they're all alike and they're all different. They shake hands with their right hand and they've got a knife behind their back in their left hand. The contempt that they each have for each other on a much deeper level is something that we're not always that aware of, but it's very much there. So I would say, to answer your question, that much like Beijing is watching Russia, North Korea is also watching both Russia and China. For example, Princeton's Russia expert Stephen Kotkin said in a magazine interview a few days ago that the Chinese are watching this very closely. They're watching the American intelligence penetration. They're watching the mistakes of despotism and the costs that you have to pay as the U.S. and European companies canceled Russia up and down. So for Xi Jinping, who's expecting to have a third term in the fall, he needed this Ukrainian invasion like a hole in the head, but now he's sort of the partial owner of it. And I would say Kim Jong-un is in much of a similar situation. But he's trying to survive as a much smaller power between two large superpowers, and the pressure on him is enormous. He will make a decision in terms of what's best for him and his regime.
Mm-hmm. Now, like we've said, since China has taken a lot of criticism for its rather tacit approval of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, do you think there's a chance for Beijing to be happy for or even secretly encourage North Korea to conduct provocations to try and get some attention off the tensions in Ukraine?
No, they don't need instability. They absolutely freak out about their borders. That's why we see what's going on in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, why we saw the treatment of Tibet over the last several decades, even Inner Mongolia, and the freaking out about the status of Taiwan. So instability in North Korea is nothing that China will welcome, especially with what's going on right now. China has ways of communicating things in a way that isn't so visible to we in the West, but it will certainly make its mark to the North Koreans.
Mm-hmm. Well, now let's go back to Pyongyang's military actions, though. Professor Kim, how do you think North Korea decides on the timing of its tests? Well, Mark a while ago said that the latest launches were domestic, but it tends to concentrate tests into a time period when geopolitical circumstances are favorable. Or do you think it's more bound by what suits the North?
Well, in principle, I think they work with their own timetables and schedules. A recent testing of missiles and other new weapons was a part of what they call 5-year military development plan. You know, the plan that Kim Jong-un said he would pursue relentlessly. And he made sure during several speeches he gave last year. He said that his regime would continuously upgrade North Korea's military capabilities and develop new strategy weapons. And that's exactly what Kim Jong-un is doing by, testing these new weapons. But that said, I think he's intensifying these tests because he thinks geopolitical circumstances are favorable for him to conduct these tests. We'll have to note that he's intensifying these tests after Russia invaded Ukraine, because he believes that Americans have their hands tied in Ukraine. Kim Jong-un may believe that because of the war in Ukraine, the U.S. can't really do much to their provocations. Even if we cross the red line, resuming these testing, testing of nuclear weapons and ICBMs, the U.S. can't really do much. So this is a very worrying situation.
Indeed. Well, now the North's attempts to test an ICBM have been continuing. Mark, do you expect the world to react? How do you expect the world to react if North Korea successfully tests another ICBM? And once it does, is another nuclear bomb test also inevitable?
We're going to see one or more ICBM tests between the end of this month and mid-April, surely. And they'll be bigger and better than ever. And it will not get the attention it normally will get. So assuming that kind of test is done, a nuclear test is a whole other story. I think China will react even more severely than it has in the past. And it's not so much a matter of China or Russia upholding UN sanctions against North Korea. It's the fact that China has other ways of communicating its condemnation to North Korea, which will have possibly a severe economic impact. So I think nuclear is a kind of a red line for China. The thing that we don't know is if Russia, God forbid, were to use tactical nukes in Ukraine, that would completely change North Korea's calculation.
And Mark, we know that much of the Biden administration's attention is focused on the situation in Ukraine, like you said, but what's going on with their diplomacy with North Korea? Lately, there doesn't seem to be any news on diplomatic talks. How would you rate the Biden administration's handling of North Korea?
I give him a D-, basically. The reality is, if you go back to Bush 41, at least he had a meeting with the #3 North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, in January of '92. You had the beginning of the Geneva talks in the Clinton administration that led to the agreed framework in 1994. You had the 4-party talks and then the 6-party talks in the latter half of the Bush 43 administration. You had the Leap Day attempted deal in 2012 under Obama. And of course, you had 3 meetings between Trump and Chairman Kim during his 4-year administration. But so far, after a little over a year of Biden being in office, it's zilch. There is no policy, and there's no excuse for it. And it's going to bite him back strongly in the weeks and months and years ahead through the remainder of his term.
Now, before we let you go, finally, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration takes the reins of power in South Korea from May. How do you expect the new South Korean government to approach North Korea, Professor Kim?
Well, I think the Yoon Suk-yeol government will take a more principled approach to North Korea. I don't think the future Yoon government will hastily resume inter-Korean cooperation and economic projects. He said a number of times that he would resume inter-Korean exchanges and economic projects only after there is a real progress in North Korea's denuclearization talk. I mean, he's not really saying that North Korea will have to disarm nuclear weapons and an ICBM all at once, but at least there's got to be a meaningful progress in denuclearization talk in order for South Korea to resume inter-Korean exchanges and inter-Korean economic projects. So for the time being, I think the relationship, inter-Korean relationship, would not turn for the better for the time being.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we will have to wrap up our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for making time for us, Mark and Professor Kim. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Now, South Korean high jumper Woo Sang-hyeok has captured a historic gold medal at the World Athletics Indoor Championships, becoming the first from the country to win a world title in any track and field event. At the championships in the Serbian capital Belgrade on Sunday, Woo cleared at 2.34 meters to top the field of 12 jumpers. Of course, he finished 4th at last year's Tokyo Summer Games, marking the best Olympic performance by a South Korean track and field athlete. Now, there's a new exhibition at the National Library of Korea, home to some of the country's most important rare and ancient books that uses technology to provide an immersive literary experience. Classic poems and other works are presented in a hall and accompanied by music and images. Our Lee Si-hoo went to check it out.
Vibrant flowers bloom as visitors walk by, depicting a scene from the poem Azaleas by Korea's early modern poet Kim So-wol. A corridor of immersive contents, 지식의 길, or Path of Knowledge, recently opened at the National Library of Korea.
This hall combines literature with digital technology as projections on its walls and floors paint the settings and themes of beloved Korean classics.
Divided into two sections, the first, called the Writer's Notes, presents mesmerizing backdrops of text, paintings, and music related to 4 literary works. The second section, called the Smart Lounge, incorporates artificial intelligence technology to make book recommendations. Visitors can answer questions regarding their personal interests and tastes, such as their favorite seasons or colors. The smart kiosk machines then recommend books. The library also recently expanded its 실감서재 project, which was launched last year. The project turns Korea's ancient literature into interactive content using cutting-edge technology. Visitors can delve into ancient literature by flipping through interactive versions of the records. They can also explore ancient maps and view where landmarks of the past would be located in modern times. These transformations are part of the Culture Ministry's initiative to build immersive contents at cultural centers around the country.
We're working hard to depart from the rigid and quiet image of conventional libraries and help visitors experience new cultural sentiments and feel closer to the library.
실감서재 can be enjoyed without reservations, while the entrance to the Path of Knowledge must be reserved through the library's official website ahead of the visit. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Many have forecast that this week, South Korea will reach the peak of the Omicron wave. And what did indeed see record-breaking figures over the past couple of days. Now, with the surge, more than 2 million people are currently recovering at home. Our Choi Min-jung tells us how they are being treated.
Some people say that Omicron is not something you avoid. It's something you just wait your turn for. And my turn has already come. I contracted COVID-19 and spent 7 days isolating and recovering at home. And I wanted to share with you what hundreds of thousands of people who are infected are going through. South Korea has long been bracing for the worst of the Omicron wave to hit the country. And now it has arrived, with cases hitting as high as 621,000 a day. As of Friday, there are over 2 million people recovering from COVID-19 at home. The majority are people under 60 years old and those who are at relatively lower risk of developing severe symptoms. With the overwhelming number of people getting infected, health authorities have decided to simplify the testing procedure.
Before, even if I got the COVID positive result in the rapid antigen test, I would have to wait until the next day for the PCR test and another day for the result to come out. And also, waiting in line for the PCR test is another great obstacle. If I recollect, it usually takes 2 to 3 hours to wait in line. And there are also similar patients standing around you, coughing. And if the weather is cold, you can imagine the frustration as well.
To minimize such inconvenience, health authorities have decided to accept rapid antigen test results conducted by medical professionals at local hospitals or clinics for official purposes, meaning their results will have the same validity as PCR tests. After testing positive at a local hospital, I was prescribed with 3 days of flu medication as I was not eligible for Paxlovid. I was then required to take an online epidemiological survey conducted by the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency. After filling in my personal information, including my name, personal identification number, and gender, I was also required to input information about my symptoms, as well as my family members who are currently living in the same house. Once the survey was completed, the Seoul Metropolitan Government provided guidelines on the different types of services people can make use of while they recover. And those who need to get medication due to worsening symptoms can consult a doctor by calling a nearby hospital or clinic or a 24-hour emergency hotline.
증상은 언제부터 있었어요? 토요일 오후요.
토요일 오후 증상은 어떤 증상 있어요?
저 지금은 뭐 기침이랑 목이랑 코 쪽에 아픈 거는 계속 있었고요, 토요일부터.
네.
근데 오늘부터 머리가 계속 어지러워가지고.
상태로 접수해서 저희가 약국 팩스로 전달해드릴 거예요.
네.
처방전 팩스로 전달해드리면 약국 어디로 갔는지 문자 드리거든요. 그 약국으로 전화해서 약 준비됐는지 확인하고 다른 분이 대리 수령해서 전달받으시면 될 것 같아요.
In just a few hours, the medicine arrived. And after getting some good rest during the 7-day quarantine, I was able to return to normal life without additional COVID-19 testing.
After I was released from quarantine, many questions came to mind. Like, is it really safe for me to be outside just after 7 days? And does still having some slight symptoms like a cough mean I could still be infectious? To clear things up for the hundreds and thousands of people out there who are infected, I'm at a hospital to talk with a medical expert.
확진자가 7일 격리 이후에 일상으로 회복을 하는데 이게 7일이 충분한가요? 안전할까요?
The virus peaks between 3 and 5 days after symptoms appear. However, a very small amount of the virus may still remain after a week or two. And 40% of the people who get tested after quarantine still show a positive test result from rapid antigen tests. So even if a week has passed, people should be wearing masks and avoid meeting others for another week.
격리가 해제된 이후에도 증상, 기침 같은 증상이 오래 남을 수가 있는데 이것도 혹시 일상 회복에 조금 안전할까요?
Even if symptoms like a cough or muscle pain remain after 2 weeks, there's almost no chance of spreading the virus to others. But if the symptoms do last for more than 2 weeks, it is recommended to see a doctor and, if necessary, undergo treatment.
Many are also curious to know whether it is possible for people to catch COVID-19 again after contracting it the first time.
Studies have shown that people who have been infected with Delta have an around 56% chance of being protected against Omicron. But we can say there's almost no chance for people once infected with Omicron to get infected with it again. If you look abroad, the number of cases begins to decline once 25 to 30% of the total population becomes infected. This means that once infected, you cannot be reinfected because you already have immunity.
Now that we have the facts, it's relieving to know that people who have been infected with Omicron are very unlikely to be infected again. But for many, the COVID-19 experience can be traumatic. And to get help, people are turning to post-COVID psychological counseling provided by the Health Ministry.
The National Center for Mental Health sends a text message to everyone who has been infected and provides them with hotline numbers or links to a website. People who wish to get counseling, regardless of how severe their COVID-19 symptoms are, can get help anytime. And those who are considered at higher risk are managed more intensively. As a once infected person, I talked to the director to ask for some psychological advice.
8 in 10 people worry that they have caused inconvenience to others. And 7 in 10 people worry over what others will think of them when they get infected. So a lot of people go through the same concerns, and knowing that I'm not the only one having these thoughts is very important for people's mental health. People may feel psychologically weaker for a moment, but we keep providing ways for them to overcome their struggles.
The country's total number of COVID-19 cases has surpassed the 8 million mark, but health authorities and medical experts say that when given proper medication, COVID-19 could eventually be treated like the flu. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Good morning. Well, it's the Vernal Equinox today, officially the start of spring, and daylight hours should continue to increase with the sun getting higher in the sky over the next 3 months. I mean, it was noticeably brighter on my way to work this morning compared to last Friday. Well, temperatures, though, will stay a few notches below normal for this time of year. In fact, Paju in Gyeonggi-do province is having a freezing morning today, but highs will rise fast, leading to wide gaps in readings there and elsewhere. Well, there's mostly sunny skies to start. It's going to be chilly through the early part of the day, so we'll need to dress accordingly. Highs will rise fast along with the sunshine, but those on Jeju Island, you'll need an umbrella as the island will receive 5 to 30 millimeters of rainfall from the late afternoon. It's going to stay colder than normal for the first half of the week, with another round of rain forecast to move in on Friday. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that's all we have for now. Seung-jae and I will be back for another episode of New Day at Arirang at 8 a.m. Korea time on Tuesday. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Woo Sang-hyeok. Have a great rest of the day, and thanks always for joining us. Take care.
Everyone knows I'm passionate. Know why? Look at how passionate Koreans are. And you know I'm fast. Don't blink. Koreans move fast too. I'm creative on the pitch. People say I'm smart. Just look how smart Korea is. I aim to be spectacular for the fans.